So good evening, bonsoir. My name is Nathan Funk, First Secretary in the Trade Section of the Canadian Embassy in Tokyo, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. So in terms of some logistical details, today's session will be recorded. And to ensure all participants are able to clearly hear the presentations, all lines should be muted other than for the panelists. So I would like to start our webinar by inviting Ms. Leslie Ann Reed, Counselor and Senior Trade Commissioner managing the Innovation, Life Sciences and Agri-Food section of the Canadian Embassy in Tokyo, Japan, to provide some opening remarks. Leslie Ann.
Thank you very much, Nate. Hello, bonsoir. Je m'appelle Leslie Ann Reed, conseillère déléguée commerciale principale à l'ambassade du Canada au Japon, où mon équipe s'occupe des secteurs d'agriculture, innovation et sciences. Our role here at the embassy is to help Canadian companies grow their business in the Japanese market. And in that spirit, we hope that this webinar will be useful for you. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Protein Industries Canada for helping organize and fund the technical support for today's webinar. We were looking forward to welcoming a PIC delegation to Japan in March earlier this year, but due to coronavirus, that unfortunately was canceled. But we're very happy to be able to meet with you virtually today to discuss doing business in Japan. We have some great speakers and presentations lined up for you. So without any further ado, au nom de l'ambassade, il me fait plaisir de vous accueillir à notre webinaire. On behalf of the embassy, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie Ann. So I would now like to invite Mr. Justin Sugawara from the investment team at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada to share a few words.
Thanks, Nathan. Just wanted to say quickly on behalf of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada that we're happy to be a part of this evening's seminar and happy that there's a number of you participating. As was mentioned by Leslie Ann, the event today is a bit of a precursor to our larger investment mission that Nathan will speak about in terms of the details on how to join at the end of the seminar. So I'm pleased to pass the baton to Carolee Garretts from the Protein Industries Canada, who will provide some opening remarks before we hear from our guest speakers. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Justin, Nathan, and Leslie Ann. My name is Carolee Garretts, and I'm the Director of Business Development at Protein Industries Canada, or PIC, as many of you may know us. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. PIC is very excited that our members will have the opportunity this evening to get a glimpse into what is happening in the plant protein sector in Japan, a very important agriculture and food market for Canada. I am also really looking forward to the insights into the how of Japanese business culture that I know are on tap for this evening. I am confident that the next hour or so will be time very well spent. On behalf of PIC and its membership, I would like to sincerely thank our partners at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the Embassy of Canada to Japan for making this evening possible. Back to you, Nathan.
Thank you so much, Leslie Ann and Carolee and Justin for those introductory words. I would say that today's webinar is very ideally timed as the Japanese protein environment is rapidly evolving and Japanese companies are eager to find Canadian partners in the protein space. Unthinkable only a few years ago, it's now common to find a variety of ready-to-eat meals containing plant-based meat products on the shelves of Japanese convenience stores and supermarkets. It's true that the vast majority of plant-based products in the Japanese market right now are soy-based, which reflects a long history of soy as a food staple in Japan. However, Japanese companies are increasingly seeking to expand their plant-based product offerings, presenting an opportunity for investment and trade for Canadian protein companies. So the purpose of today's presentations is to provide you with some insight into the Japanese protein market and to assist you in better understanding the dynamics of working with Japanese partners so that you can have more effective meetings. After each of today's presentations, we encourage you to pose questions to the speakers and to follow up with them after the session, should you wish to work with them further. So the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service and provincial offices are also here in Japan, ready to serve Canadian clients and to help you better understand the market, to provide you with trade leads, and to find suitable business partners in Japan. We will send contact information along with the presentations received following today's seminar. So as mentioned, there will be an opportunity to pose questions to the speaker. Please write questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen and send them to all panelists. The moderator will then read out the selected questions, and we will do our best to respond to the questions received during the webinar today or through a private message or email afterwards. So, s'il vous plaît, notez que les présentations d'aujourd'hui seront en anglais, mais s'il vous plaît, posez vos questions dans la langue de votre choix. So without further ado, first up is Meros Consulting to start our presentations today. Meros Consulting is a Tokyo-based strategy consulting firm focusing exclusively on global food and agricultural markets, and it's founded by an international team of food and ag enthusiasts. Meros works with businesses and governments to help them develop innovative business strategies for food, agriculture, and natural resource markets in Asia and around the world. So we have with us today, Ms. Chisa Ogura and Ms. Lucia Vancura from Meros Consulting, who will now be giving a presentation and taking questions and answers on the Japanese protein market. Hope you enjoy. Ladies.
Good morning from Tokyo. My name is Lucia Vancura, and as Nathan said, I'm joined by my colleague Chisa Ogura, and we're going to be talking about three main topics today. We're going to first do a quick overview of the Japanese food market, some consumer trends that I think are relevant for protein industries, some demographic trends. Then Chisa's going to talk about the plant-based protein market specifically within the Japan overall food market. And then we'll briefly look at some tips for Japanese and Canadian business development that we have sort of learned from our own experience working in this market. Okay, let's jump into this. The first trend that is in the media all the time, big topic of conversation here, is that Japan's population is decreasing and aging. If you see the percentages at the bottom of the slide, you'll see the good news is there is an increasingly large number of healthy, health-conscious, and active seniors who are always part of an important part of thinking about protein strategies in Japan. The downside of this trend, of course, is the overall population is shrinking, meaning less food consumption overall, and players already in the market are going to have increased competition to maintain share and maintain volumes in the Japan markets. So when we look at some of the other demographics that are massively impacting food consumption in Japan, one of them is increased participation by women in the labor force. You can see here between 2009 and 2019, there's been a big jump in the number of women continuing to work after marriage and childbirth. This is now 73% of working age women. Doesn't necessarily mean a great job or a good career, but it's maybe part-time jobs and dead-end jobs included. But this rate, 73%, is the same as Canada and actually 6 points better than the EU. And this continued participation of women in the labor force has had a major impact on household shopping, on consumption in the home, how food is prepared, an increase in interest in convenience foods, easy to cook, easy to prepare, takeaway foods, and things like that, that we can see now in the next slide. If you see here, you can see that long before coronavirus and takeaway food services got extremely popular, the amount of household spending on ready-to-eat meals was already skyrocketing in the last 10 years. This is the one area of the overall food service industry that's been really growing. And on the right, you can see the overall food service industry, despite the declining population, has been growing for the last few years. You can see the green at the top, the dark green, that's the takeaway meal industry. And this year, of course, because of the corona pandemic impact, the overall food service industry has shrunk by about 17%, but that decline has been driven mostly by hotel, bar, pubs, and some restaurant decline, not so much in the takeaway area, which is still a booming industry. Another issue that is really important when trying to enter the Japan market is to realize that this is an urbanized country and continuously urbanizing. Over 50% of Japan's population is centered in just 3 urban areas. Tokyo is, of course, the largest, followed by Osaka, Kyoto area, metro area, and then Nagoya. And with this kind of density of urbanization, Tokyo is still a very good gatekeeper, gateway into the Japan market. Most new food trends start in Tokyo, and it's the driver for imported foods and new foods. So it's really a good place to still, start any sort of marketing or entry into the Japan market. So in a dense Japan, what does the typical urban consumer look like? This is a picture of a typical Japanese consumer, Japanese person's house. It's actually Chisa's kitchen. So this is a real example. You'll see how small a typical kitchen is with very little storage space, right? There's no pantry, there's no big cupboards. The main appliances are simply a microwave, refrigerator, rice cooker, and a stovetop with maybe a fish grill. Same in my house. This is very typical. And the point is that you can see that shelf space is limited, storage is limited, and types of cooking, no big ovens that we're used to in the United States or Canada. So any products that you think about introducing to the Japan market have to really keep in mind the lifestyle of a typical Japanese consumer and localize. Localization is the key, making sure products can fit these types of cooking styles, as well as the storage restrictions, which mean more frequent shopping and smaller packaging. So talking about these small packages of foods, what are 2 of the trends specifically to protein? So the low carb, high protein trend is, pretty much a global trend, and it's here in Japan as well. It's being marketed as a health trend. And particularly the trend for consumer use of protein, whey protein, for example, started to increase in around 2015, like five years ago. And here, within the last year, you see 2 types of consumer products. The one on the left from Zavas, which is the big like protein powder brand that used to be mostly marketed to male athletes, bodybuilders, people really serious about muscle training. These 2 products are marketed to women. They're like drink boxes. You can go to the convenience store and get a small chilled drink box of whey protein mixed with soy protein with a flavor. I think one is strawberry, one is milk tea or something. But they're an attempt by Zavas, a protein maker, to make protein drinks a daily part of consumption, something you get as a snack, not something necessarily that you only drink after you've been working out at the gym. This is something we've seen in the last year. And on the right, we see a series of protein bars. These are not a new product on the market, but this branding is new. This is something we've seen in the last year. This is from Asahi Group. This protein bar used to have a different name, but in the last year, they've rebranded, repackaged, and now the main word on the bar is just protein. And so this is evidence of how protein is now a very sort of attractive thing to market, especially to women and seniors, no longer just a niche for people who are really into sports and gyms. So in the same trend, sometimes, especially in North America, some of these protein and plant-based trends go together hand in hand with other sort of diet and lifestyle trends. So let's look and see if that's true in Japan as well. So for example, vegan and vegetarian lifestyles in Japan are still followed by very few consumers. However, the word vegan and this idea of non-meat or having a meatless day has really grown in the last year, a couple of years. The word vegan is now known in Japanese, but it's used mostly in the sense of, hey, let's get a vegan meal tonight, or let's do vegan on Friday. It's more of a type of meal, a meatless meal, rather than any sort of lifestyle or particular sort of philosophy. And so this difference is important to know. The other trend that sometimes is linked to an increase in plant-based eating or increase in plant-based proteins is consumer interest in organic. However, in Japan, organic has been very slow to catch on. This is also true for like grass-fed beef and some of these other sort of organic and environmentally friendly different products. You can see here on the left, Japan's spending on organic food is minuscule compared to US, Germany, and Switzerland with a much smaller population. It is growing, as you can see on the right, but from a very small base. And the main point here is that the organic market is tiny for a variety of reasons. But one of the main ones is that Japanese consumers' image is that domestic products, conventional domestic products, are already safe and tasty. Why would you spend anything additional for an organic product when you believe that your conventional products are already completely safe and tasty? And this sort of image is also true for the meat industry. It does not have an image of being inhumane or environmentally unfriendly the way it sometimes does in some Western countries. So these are sort of differences in consumer perception that are sometimes important to remember. Okay, now let's dig into the protein market itself, and Chisa's going to take over for this one.
Okay, the first, let me talk about the current protein consumption in Japan. Please look on the right-hand side that the average daily protein consumption declined through the late 1990s until around 2011. This is driven by a sharp decline in fish consumption during that period. We explained the low carb and high protein as one of the recent health food trends, but it is not just a consumer temporary trend. Furthermore, to increase intake of protein itself, in general, it's still important meaning from a nutritional point of view in Japan. And even compared to other countries, Japan per capita consumption of protein is lower than other developed countries or even other East Asian countries. And fish and seafood accounts still 16% of protein intake, as symbolized by sushi. Japanese cuisine is characterized by its use of fish. And another feature of Japanese protein intake is that it is 11% of soybean. That is because of traditional soybean food products like tofu or natto, that is fermented soybean, and miso and soy sauce, and the bull's fermented soybean condiment. And as shown in the left, Japanese consumption of fish and seafood has been declining dramatically in the past 20 years. And as shown in the right, traditional soybean products and liquid milk consumption has been declining trend as well. Contrarily, demand for meat and cheese and other daily products has been increasing and taking share, but not as fast as the decline of seafood consumption. So, as a main driver of these changes in the increasing Western changes is the increasing Western influences on Japanese cuisine. And this trend is expected to continue. Here's an example of shift or breakfast. The left-hand side is the Japanese traditional style, and right-hand side is the today's breakfast. It's more like a convenient food. And the decline in seafood consumption is expected to continue further, even from now on, due to the increasingly limited marine resources, and the price is also going expensive, and as well as dislike of cooking, bony and strong smelling seafood, and also Japanese consumer need more convenient food. And thus, the demand for other protein sources like plant-based protein is highly likely to increase. I think there is a potential for plant-based protein to create a market in Japan, not as just an alternative on meat and dairy, but as an additional source of protein. And next, I would like to jump into the protein ingredients trend. Despite of the Japanese shrinking and aging population, the demand for both plant-based and animal-based protein ingredients has been increasing during the last decades. And the overall market has been growing 2% per year, but import supply has been growing by 3 to 4% per year because of the stagnant of domestic supply. Imports of both plant-based and animal-based protein ingredient products are expanding, as I explained. And as you can see, China, US, New Zealand, Netherlands, and Germany are the major suppliers to the market. And the major usage of plant-based protein in Japanese market varies like this due to the demographic changes as we discussed before, especially expansion of frozen food and prepared ready-to-eat foods are impacted very positively to the plant-based protein. And another interesting sectors, including snack and health food, food for seniors, as well as alternative meat, dairy, and seafood sector. Since the alternative meat and dairy sector has exploded this year, I'd like to show some examples here. Here are 3 example major players, and they are all traditional soybean processors, including the soy oil crushers, as well as traditional soybean food manufacturers. They were the pioneers of plant-based alternative meat and dairy in Japanese market. Of course, they are focusing on how to utilize soybean. And the left-hand side is the soy cheese from the largest soybean cooking oil manufacturer. The middle is grounded soy meat from the largest soybean seasoning paste manufacturer. And the right-hand side is soy yogurt from the largest ready-to-eat boiled soybean manufacturers. And another category of the leading players in alternative meat market are the large meat processors, including Starzen, Nippon Ham, and Ito Ham. All of them jumped into this market in the 2019 or early 2020. They developed product ranges, including hamburger steaks, ham, bacon, sausages, and meatballs. And since they have some existing shelf space at the retail stores as a meat processor, so it is really easy for them to get into the main channel. And these are all based on soy. And in spring and summer of this 2020 was really the year of explosion of alternative meat in Japan. And almost all convenience store chains, including Lawson, 7-Eleven, and Family Mart, and a couple of food service and the cafe chains also jumped into the market. Again, there are various products, but all soy-based. And starting to see, I starting to see some couple pea protein products, and I also saw a couple brands from Canada, the retail brands from Canada, online sales channels, but mainly the soy, mainly the pea protein powder for the athletes' demand, and so they haven't touched the main channels yet. And I also see some products for the people with soy allergies too. So the key takeaways here is need to increase various protein sources other than seafood. There is a need. And the second, increasing import demand for plant-based and animal protein ingredients. So there is an increasing demand for import products. And the third point, the usage of those protein ingredients are various from bulking agent for meat and fish processed products. And the increasing demand is coming from prepared foods and ready-to-eat foods, as well as health bars and drinks, and foods for elderly persons. And the fourth point is thanks to the Japanese aging population and women's interest in protein, the protein market is expected to continue to be a very dynamic and innovative sector. And the fifth point, the so-called alternative meat and dairy market in Japan has grown more slowly compared to the North American market actually, but it exploded in this year. And that was mainly led by the traditional large players and nearly all soy-based products. So the main reason is soy is healthy. It's a widely accepted concept among consumers in Japan. And one of the challenges could be the positioning of Canadian non-soy-based products, which doesn't have consumer awareness compared to the existing cheap soybean-based products. So identify the niche market fit with your products is a really important process for you to think about. Okay.
Great. Great, thanks Chisa for that overview of the protein market. So we're going to finish up with a few tips for business development in Japan. So I'm not going to discuss, Japanese business culture or Japanese business etiquette. I think there are other presenters who can talk about that. Instead, we wanted to pick up a few points from our own experience working with companies that have been entering Japan or trying to grow business in Japan or trying to find partners in Japan. So the first one, slide 30, yeah. So one issue before you even try to enter the market is just to make sure you understand Japan's food import regulatory process. It's more complicated than some people expect before they enter Japan, especially related to food additives. If you're trying to export a food product, right, something ready to eat or a retail packaged product, Meros has created a series of food export guides that are available online. They're public. We worked with the US government for those, but that's one of the resources that you could use as you start to plan your export strategy or your business development strategy in Japan. Another thing to understand is really who are the key business players and business partners for a protein business in Japan? Who are the investors? So we see on the left that there's basically 4 major categories of companies that we see tend to invest in food products, especially ones that would be considered part of the protein world. One is the trading companies. That's Mitsui, Itochu, Sumitomo, Marubeni. They, traditionally are trading, buying and selling products globally, but actually these days they're much more than that. They are basically investment companies, branding and marketing companies. They do trade, but in order to use products that they trade in the companies that they have bought. So they are constantly acquiring companies and then using products they source globally for these products, for these companies. So trading companies are a great place to start. Food and ingredient manufacturers like Ajinomoto, Fuji Oil are increasingly investing in startups even and bringing in new food technologies into their companies for using in their products. Meat and dairy related companies like Starzen, lots of innovation in the food service industry, which we mentioned before is growing, right? It's one of the few sectors that's growing. So you see like branding for food service, branding for ingredients, things like that. Other large manufacturers as well are doing a lot of investment. Of course, there are VCs and corporate VCs like SoftBank or investment funds, but we see them doing less investment into the food space, food and agriculture in general. Okay, great. Hopefully, Nathan and the team in Canada will share this presentation with you. We made up a list here of sort of the 10 top questions that we hear being discussed or asked by the Japanese side when we work with companies from overseas. These are the top 10 sort of type of questions. 2 to maybe pay attention to is number 2, the background and roles of each team member, being really ready to bring out the bios of the people on your team that would be the key players that the Japanese team would work with, especially if you're a technology company or a startup. Having elite people, meaning like professors and people who the Japanese side may feel are sort of voices of expertise, is sometimes more important for the Japan side than you might expect. And number 6, main competitors. Do you know who your competitors are in Japan, or who your competitors are globally that the Japanese partner may be comparing you to? Like how well do you know how you are different than other players is something that comes up a lot in those early discussions with potential partners. All right, so finally, we just developed the 3 core things that you can do to attract Japanese investors and get off on the right foot with a potential partner in Japan. Personal context and patience. You need a lot of patience to develop business in Japan because of a very slow decision-making process. Our 3 big tips are to prepare the right presentation materials. It can be in English. Having a Japanese version is even better, but not always necessary. But the presentation needs to have very few words, very clear visuals, lots of numbers and facts, something that people can really sort of catch onto just by seeing your slides or seeing your presentation. Simple and straightforward messages are the best way to start out. Second, establish face-to-face contacts. There's a lot more emphasis on face-to-face and relationship building and building that trust. Expect, I mean, it's hard during these Corona times, but expect to come to Japan often, to visit, to have face-to-face contacts, and to build that trust with your potential partners, because Japanese companies are traditionally very loyal to partners that they choose. Once they choose, they're often ready to go through thick and thin, to go through hard times, to overcome challenges together. So the key is building that trust. And then you will not expect people to, on the Japan side, to switch suppliers quickly just because of price or something. The key thing here is finding out who are the decision makers. That's the tricky thing sometimes. And starting to establish that face-to-face contact with them. You need to be patient because decisions go up the tree and then down the tree. It can take weeks or months to make decisions on a very different timeline that you're maybe expecting. But if the face-to-face contacts and communication is good, you'll be able to sort of see where the decision is in the timeline. And finally, we always find it really useful if the Canadian teams invite the Japanese core team from Japan to visit Canada, to see your team, to see your technology, to see your fields, to see your company. And just make sure that the people you invite are the decision makers. Every junior employee would love a trip to Canada, but they are not usually the ones who are making the decisions. And if you have not identified the real decision makers, this could end up not being that effective. But trips to Canada to really see how technology is working within the Canadian market is always excellent. Okay, great. So just to summarize and finish this up, as we said, we are here to help any sort of Canadian company. It does not have to be only proteins, but that's our topic today. We're here in Tokyo, but we're working in Asia. And we really love helping companies develop their business strategies, do commercial due diligence, and especially our core thing is field research, getting onto the ground, talking to manufacturers, visiting the factories, getting data and information that's not available online, not available in existing reports, but is really customized for you and your issues. You can see that we work on the next slide, Shisa, with partners around the world. So we can always create a team that can solve your problem. And finally, like, what do? We can provide intelligence about the market, all the competitors, where a product might fit, advise you on, should you enter the market? Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should consider somewhere else. What are your challenges likely to be? And help to develop a strategic roadmap for entering the Japanese market, the timing, the expenses needed, what steps you might want to take. And once you're ready to test the waters and really jump into the Japan market and meeting people, we can certainly help to screen, identify, or maybe test the interest of potential partners, investors towards your products, help you with communication, help with those presentation materials that are very important to have for those early meetings, and facilitate and advise in any way that you might. We love just brainstorming, so just contact us so we can just kind of talk through some of your issues. So on the last slide here, we have our email addresses. Please be in touch if you have any additional questions after this presentation. We're also website, Twitter, Facebook. It's pretty easy to find us. Thank you for this, and I hope you got some questions.
Great. Thank you very much for that informative presentation. I now open the floor to any questions for the speakers. We've already had a couple pop in right here. So maybe I'll get those started. But in the meantime, if you have any other questions, please feel free to just click on the chat box at the bottom and write your questions if you have any for the first speakers today. So the first question we received is, you showed us many great examples of soy and whey protein branded items appearing on shelves. Do you have any examples of branding of other plant protein products? I think probably what they're alluding to is anything such as pea or other types of products like that. In your experience, have you seen any of those?
Great. So as we said, the majority of the products here are still soy-based, right? Some have whey protein included, but are mostly soy-based. Often things are branded to the public as plant protein burger, plant burgers, though we know it's actually soy. Chisa had one example of the pea protein products that she has started to see. We do see products that are made of like alternative meats that are made from like konnyaku, which is a starch, kind of a potato starch thing that's well known in Japan. But Chisa, do you have any other comments on how pea protein might be marketed in Japan?
I think that I also saw a couple of times about health bars using a little bit of pea protein in addition to the soy protein. But for the pea protein and the other types of plant protein is quite new to the market. And I think the interest is going up because I know a couple of distributors is now hunting the pea protein imported from Canada or the Europe. But still, yet on the shelf, it's rare to see that when I check the label, it's rare to see the the other types of protein other than soybeans. So it's I think it's now in the development stage. So it's the right timing to jump into the market, I feel.
Great, thank you. We had a question about Japanese customers' attitudes towards sustainability, traceability, transparency, environment impact, animal welfare, which are some hot topics on plant-based proteins in North America. How do Japanese consumers feel about those things?
Yeah, this is an absolutely excellent question. We get these questions not only from industries like yourselves, but some of the like grass-fed meat industries from New Zealand, people who are used to using these kinds of messaging in their home countries as a marketing point. So in Japan, consumers' attitudes in general towards being environmentally friendly is quite strong. Recently, they've banned like plastic bags at the cash registers in supermarkets across Japan. So environmental friendliness is definitely something that is important. But however, consumers' sort of choices when buying foods related to sustainability, animal welfare especially, is not strong. It really is almost not a point in a lot of supermarket, for example, messaging. And part of the reason, as I sort of mentioned before, is that Japanese consumers have long considered their own food system to be very safe, and having lots of friendly farmers are advertised next to the food counters in the supermarket. This is who is making your food. And so animal welfare, for example, has really been something that supermarkets and food service suppliers have been really hesitant to even discuss, because by saying this product is humane, it has the implication that other ones are not, like all the other things we sell are not. And that's a message that retailers and food service suppliers in Japan do not want to make. Same with organic in some cases. Like, why would, if I'm selling organic, does that imply that all the other things are not healthy? So it's been it's sort of a struggle, I think, to use some of the same messaging that you use in Western markets to directly try to appeal to Japanese consumers. Instead, the messages that really work are health, being healthy, and sort of things that are environmentally friendly in a general sense, but without the sustainability message necessarily as far as environmental sustainability. The idea of organic farming being environmentally sustainable is not something that consumers are aware of here.
Great, thank you. We had a couple of other questions. One question was, and you touched on this a bit in your presentation, but the question is, do large fast food chains also offer plant-based items as they do in North America?
Yeah, great one. Yeah. Chisa, why don't you take that? What sort of plant-based burgers and products do we see in the food service and fast food?
The fast food and especially cafe chains, they are now trying to develop a new sandwich products in addition to their coffees. So they're quite innovative to create new types of the sandwich or the hamburger products. And so that's the place we first to saw the plant-based protein burger and the hamburger with the soy-based meat inside of there. And but they are trying to capture the flexitarian market, that who are vegetarian, but who so-called vegetarian, but
but they're not.
but only once a day, one meal per day, or one meal per week is vegetarian types of people. And I think they are doing okay, but the most of them are very recently come into the market, like last month or so. So it's a little too early to judge how they will be successful in the market.
Yeah. And also, you know, the products that we see in North America, like Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger, there isn't really the same interest in an alternative burger the same way there is in the West. Like there isn't, you know, burgers are not necessarily a daily food item. And again, people don't have the same image that their own lifestyle is unhealthy to begin with. So if you eat a burger once in a while as a treat, does it really need to be, you know, non-beef burger, right? The mentality is a little bit different. So some of the fast food products that we are seeing are sometimes, like alternative, you know, fried chicken and things like this, not necessarily a burger, like a plant-based burger product the way they might see it in Canada or the US.
Great, thank you. We have another question. So the question is, and you have touched on this in some of your answers, but maybe you just wanted to expand on it. Japan being historically so strong on soybean products, where do you think Canadian plant-based protein products derived from pulses and other crops can find their niche? Would you say that the Japanese consumer cares about nutritional composition or flavor?
Good point. Do you want to take that, Chisa, or do you want to?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So, yeah, as Chisa had mentioned, in some ways, maybe one challenge will be that soybean-based products are familiar, very high awareness that they are healthy and pretty inexpensive. So on the business side, there is that's going to be, you know, a challenge that you and your partners will have to take away. But if consumers care about nutritional composition or flavor, I would say overall, and I don't think it's unique to Japan, it's flavor. Like if something isn't delicious, they're not going to eat it again, right? They're not eating plant-based things because they think their existing lifestyle is unhealthy. That is a big difference between, say, North American, where people have an image that, oh, my lifestyle is unhealthy, my food is unhealthy. People are eating a plant-based thing because it's something new and yes, healthy, but it also has to taste good if you want people to buy it a second time. So people do pay attention to labels. So nutritional composition is important, but if something is being marketed as a treat, as something, you know, kind of like a drink that you might have in the evening or on your way as a sort of snack, probably flavor is still going to be the number one thing. People aren't going to buy something again if it's not delicious. They might try it once, but won't buy it again.
Great. So, oh, sorry. Did you want to expand? We had a couple of other questions. So it's
yeah,
good.
Go ahead.
We're getting a lot of interesting questions. Great. So what kind of opportunities, trends specific to the aging population might be more advanced in Japan than in other markets?
Yeah, you know, I don't personally know what is necessarily more advanced, but we do know when we work with food manufacturers here in Japan, like some of the big food manufacturers, they all have large departments specifically for food for the, you know, seniors. A lot of foods that are, you know, easy to swallow, easy to, that are tasty, have familiar flavors, but easy to eat, easy to swallow, easy to digest. And they have entire departments doing that are really looking at, you know, nutritional balance and formulas and things like that. So I would feel that I don't know if that's necessarily more advanced than what you see in Canada, but it's definitely an area where you have a large number of people really working carefully to find the right ingredients and to market those ingredients, because this aging population is, you know, there's quite a lot of people that are quite energetic, but may have some, you know, health limitations that make their diets change as they get older, but they have disposable income and they still want tasty foods.
Great. So another question we received is there any demand for plant proteins in the upscale pet food sector, or that you're aware of?
So what do you think?
I think it's a really interesting sector because the number of pets is increasing here in Japan because of the number of people living alone or in the elderly family, and they prefer to have the pets at home instead of kids. And so, and I see the dried cheese or the whey protein utilized in the pet food market as well, and people taking care of pets really care about the health of the pet. And actually the soy-based protein is utilized a lot in the pet food industries, is what I know. So if we can have some good the marketing theme, can utilize the health benefits of the other types of plant-based protein, there might be some interesting chance over there.
Yeah, because people are definitely willing to spend on pets and pet food. There's no doubt about that.
Great. I think we have just the time for this one last question. So this is, how do Japanese consumers perceive and approach dairy versus soy versus other plant proteins? Is protein rich usually attached to snack type foods? I know you mentioned in your presentation some examples of that, but I think it's more, is this how are those products perceived, and are those protein rich messages normally attached to snack type products?
Yeah, protein, you know, in the last couple of years, protein has become such a sort of a buzzword, a popular word for marketing. And it is, I showed the example of the protein bar that has repackaged itself to simply just have the word protein on the package and almost nothing else. So there is a big boom among women, which traditionally were not people who were specifically looking for protein, but now they're drinking these protein drinks and protein snacks marketed specifically to women. Dairy has done this for a while. Like cheese, for example, has been marketed to children for several decades now as a protein and high calcium, high protein snack. So it's not a strange thing at all to put protein into a snack, but it's not limited to snacks. I mean, this is what a lot of these elderly or these senior food products are. There's a lot, the Japanese government has increased the recommended daily consumption, recommended amount of protein per day for seniors, which means that there's much more demand among seniors to eat more protein as a way to maintain muscle mass and bones and to avoid fragility as they get older. So it's not limited to snacks, though it certainly can be, but foods in general that are high protein and ready meals and things like that, ready to eat meals that say, all the protein you need, like one daily serving, can definitely work as well.
Yeah, I even saw the high protein ramen noodles.
Yeah,
that was marketed in the supermarket.
Yeah, they're putting extra protein in ramen, like instant ramen. There's a real ramen restaurant that does like all protein, like high protein noodles and things like that. So the idea of protein as to boost already well-known products as an additional ingredient into a well-known product is definitely a trend.
Well, excellent. That was very informative. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to provide that presentation and the Q&A sessions.
Great.
So thank you very much, Damaris, again. And please feel free to follow up with them after the webinar with any follow-up questions, or if you'd like to work with them further. So thank you. So the second presentation today is from EdgeOff, and we're lucky to have with us this evening Mr. Alex Odajima, who is the CEO of EdgeOff Innovation, and which is one of the top innovation leaders in Japan. EdgeOff specializes in tech and VCs, but Alex also has a vast network and knowledge of working with Japanese corporates, and he will be sharing some tips and advice today on working with Japanese partners more generally. So he's a lead mentor for the Embassy's Canadian Technology Accelerator Program, which provides tech companies with coaching and mentoring services. He's also fully trilingual in Japanese, English, and French. So Alex will now share his knowledge and experience of Japanese business culture. So Alex, please take the floor.
Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir tout le monde. So my name is Alex Odajima. I'm a CEO of a company named EdgeOff Innovation. I'm working with many embassies here in Japan to help their startups come to the Japanese market. And today I will talk more about the fundamentals of the Japanese business culture, so that you'll be able to understand more about how to behave when you have to deal with Japanese corporates. And I'm sure a lot of good points were mentioned already with the presentation from Meros. So I will be more trying to expand those knowledge and try to give you a better understanding on the why they behave like this. So let me share my presentation. All right, so sorry, I can't share my screen, apparently.
Okay, Shimizu-san, can you share your screen? I think you had Alex's presentation. Just bear with us 1 minute.
Let me try.
Oh no, it appears to be working.
Is it working? All right. Okay, so before going into details of the Japanese business culture, let me give you a brief explanation about the situation of the Japanese economy. So as anyone probably already knows, Japan is the third biggest country in the world in terms of GDP. As you can see on the map, it's almost like you had a combination of many different countries like Sweden, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Thailand, Hungary. All those countries combined is the equivalent of the size of the Japanese market. And the very interesting point is that it's not like everything is in Tokyo. Surprisingly as it could sound, sure, the concentration into Tokyo is strong, but there are other economical epicenters like Osaka, Fukuoka. If you are a startup, it could be very interesting to have a look at it, because there are a lot of governmental support trying to bring foreign startups into those regions outside of Tokyo. And there are real market there too. And the major brands from Japan, like automobile, a lot of telecommunication companies. And the very important point is that Japan is, sure, the third biggest country in the world, but it didn't grow almost at all for 20, 30 years. The GDP growth is very flat compared to other countries. The salary didn't change much. That's the average. So if you only look at the young people, the average salary is even decreasing for certain people. So the income is not growing. That's maybe a very important point to think when you are developing marketing strategy, trying to sell your product to Japanese consumers. And it's a country which needs a lot of innovations. As it was previously mentioned, it's decreasing population in Japan. So we are losing population. There's a good point in there is that robotics and AI is very welcome. There are companies who have to close their doors because they can't find employees. So, well, probably not the topic today, but when I talk with startups, I very often mention that they don't have to be afraid of dealing with the lobbyists or whatever if they're trying to bring AI that replace employees. It's an aging population. There is a huge market of targeting this population. We call it silver tech in the startup jargon, but I'm sure that there will be a lot of product that could be developed really targeting people over 65 years old. And it's a huge market for that. The energy, environmental issues because of the earthquake, which happened almost 10 years ago. And another very interesting point is that Japan is a great country to do linear innovation, like making TVs bigger or a car safer. Progressive innovation is great, but when it comes to disruptive innovation, they are really not good at it. And there's a lot of reason on that, but that's a very interesting point. And this is the reason why more and more large corporations are starting to try to find interesting startups outside of Japan. And there are a lot of CVCs like SoftBank or any other big corporates. Most of big corporates that you've heard the name of have a corporate VC now. And investment to startups outside of Japan is really accelerating very fast. So this is the basic landscape of the Japanese startup, Japanese economical situation. And when it comes to entrepreneurial culture, there is a very interesting point, is it used to be an innovative friendly country. So after the war, everything was completely destroyed and everyone has to start from scratch. There were only startups in this country, right? And then all the managers, CEOs of those used to be startups like Toshiba, Sharp, or Sony. They were very entrepreneurial minded. The problem is nowadays, all the CEOs are employees who work in the same company for 30, 40 years. And that's something, even if you're not a startup and you have to deal with Japanese corporate, that's a good thing to keep in your mind, is that decision makers in those large companies are people who used to work there for 20, 30 years. They don't know much about other companies' behaviors. They literally, some are only looking at the inside of the company. So that's a very strong cultural point that is quite unique in this country. And they don't really like to start their own business. They are afraid to take risk. That's risk averse. It's a very unique, it's a characteristic of Japanese people. That's a graph that where you can see a big contrast between Canada and Japan, a fear of failure and desire to start business. The Japanese people are afraid to fail, so they don't want to start new business. And apparently Canada is almost like the average of all the countries which were researched in this graph. But they're really risk averse and they don't want to start new business. So it means that there's a lot of opportunities for challengers from outside of Japan. And when you ask the students, they prefer to go to big corporates, whatever they will have to do, than try to go to a company where they will be able to do what they want. So doing what I want or not is not that important. Stability is very important in the mindset of Japanese people. And the company where you can, so that the same thing you can see in this graph is that stability is becoming more important than actually being able to do what they want. And this is a very important, and it might be the only thing I would like you to remember from my presentation, is that Japanese people is not that they don't want to take risk. Because if you think about Tokyo, it's the biggest city in Japan, has, if you include the whole metropolitan area, it has almost 30 million people living in this area. But there's more than 70% probability that there will be a huge earthquake destroying the whole city within the 30 years. So everyone living in this area are taking risk, right? But it doesn't change, and the population in Tokyo is growing. So the truth is that the Japanese people are afraid to be responsible. And there's a big difference here. If everyone is making the same decision, even if the decision is very risky, no one is going to be the only responsible person. In that case, they could take that kind of decisions, right? I put this picture of harakiri because that how serious responsibility is considered in this country. When you make a mistake and you're the one who made the decision, you will be responsible and you'll be pointed at. And big corporates, especially, a lot of people will grow up into the management layer because they didn't take any risk and they didn't make any mistake. And that's the core fundamental mindset of Japanese people. They don't want to be responsible. And maybe this is the reason why I could see in the presentation of Meros that there were few points that were very important when you have to deal with Japanese corporate. They will ask you about the financial situation, what kind of people you have in the team. All those information are necessary for the employees of your Japanese partner to prove that it's not risky. And if those information is provided and there is a mistake later, they can tell that, well, I did the necessary research. I made sure about those points. I'm not the responsible person. It is not my fault. That's very important. So please remember that when you deal with Japanese corporate, make sure that the person in front of you won't feel responsible about the decision they make. Provide whatever necessary information, materials, so that they can share in their company to show that, well, the decision is a good decision. It's not his only one decision, right? So give you some keywords. It's a Japanese word, honne tatemai, which actually Japanese people won't tell you the truth. When you're at the meeting, for example, and if you show some very interesting technology, almost everyone will say, well, that's great. But it doesn't mean that they really appreciate the technology or they really understood the thing. It's more like a politeness. They want to show that they are polite with you, so they will look very happy. And that happens very often with foreign startups who have a meeting with large corporations. They will come out from the meeting and say, wow, they were very interested. They really liked the idea. I'm sure I will get a contract, but it's not the case most of the time. So please keep in mind that whatever they will tell you, it's more like a sign of politeness than what they really think. Another concept, the taraimawashi, which means that they will, because they don't want to be responsible, they will make you introduction to other people in the company so that you can't really see who is the right decision maker. And the taraimawashi means that to avoid being responsible, they will try to turn you around to meet everyone in the company so that everyone will make a mutual decision. Nemawashi is also something similar. And this is the reason why it takes a lot of time to make any decision in Japanese company, is because when it's a high level decision like acquiring a company, there are a lot of money involved, the decision has to be mutual. So it's not one person who will have the whole responsibility and decide everything, that they will take a lot of time to convince every key players in the company, even if it's difficult to understand why they will be involved. They will make sure that it's everyone's mutual decision and no one will be kept away, or there will be any disadvantage for any person in the company by acquiring that kind of startups. So this is the reason why it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of internal discussions that is necessary when you make decision in a Japanese company. And kento shimasu, kento suru, which means I will think about it. And if you go to a meeting with Japanese people and you have an interpreter, the sound kento, you will hear a lot. They will always tell you, yeah, I will think about it, kento shimasu. But actually it's literally like they will think about it, but they won't decide anything about it. So really, Japanese people will take a lot of time, really a lot of time to decide anything because of the core reason I showed you in the last page. And this is why you have to be super patient. And I think Lucia mentioned the same thing. If you want to do business in Japan, you have to be very patient. It takes a lot of time. Biggest challenges. So it's getting better and better. But again, when you higher level people tend to not speak English most of the time. So if you have a document only in English, well, it's fine, but having a Japanese version will really, really help. They won't tell you what they really think, if they like the product or not, or that's something it's gonna take time for them to tell the truth. A lot of corporates don't really like to be the first, especially if you are an innovative tech company. You have to show that the company is already used, or it already has a real life application. And then they need relationship. It's not like you go to a meeting for the first time, you show a great product and you will get a contract. You will need to take time to have understand a relationship building, getting trust. It's very difficult under the current situation, but go drink. It's very important. If you have the opportunity to meet your potential future partner in Japan, try to spare a bit of time after the meeting. So if they invite you to go drink, don't waste the opportunity, because it's one important key to build this relationship. And a lot of corporate don't know exactly what they want. You are the one who has to come up with very concrete proposal on how to use your technology to make their business better. It's not like you explain what you can do with it and they will come up with ideas. You are the one who has to propose, the idea. And so that's more, I will go very briefly on the landscape, because there are many people who are not in the startup industry here. So the mindset is changing. The investment into startups is increasing very fast. The government is starting a lot of support, like the venture investments increasing. J Startup, it's a very important Japanese government entity who is helping startups to go outside of Japan or help foreign startups come to the Japanese market. So that's a bit of details of numbers because of, and also an interesting point here in Japan is that investment to startups, almost half is done from corporates and not VCs. That's very important. So if you are protein related technology company and you want to seek investment from Japan, it's very interesting to look for corporates who will become your future customers who would invest into you. Might be easier to find investors who are investing for making money out of the investment. And that's a very characteristic point of the Japanese investment industry. Companies have crazy amount of cash into them in the bank accounts. Unfortunately, because of the COVID, the situation is changing a bit. But until last year, they had so much cash into in the bank account, they didn't know what to do with it. So this is why there was a huge trend of creating a corporate VCs last year. I think in last year only, we had about 100 or 150 new corporate VCs created. And the government is encouraging large companies to make investments so that they can pull out the cash from the bank account. But unfortunately, the COVID, the companies are losing sales and they have to prepare to what's going to happen next. So it's changing a bit, but hopefully it will come back again within a few months. Very few unicorns when we consider the size of the economy. The US, China, the 1 and 2 in terms of GDP has more than 100 unicorns, but Japan has only 1. That's a bit old graph, but I think we have 3 unicorns now. But again, compared to China or US, the number of unicorns is very, very small. And that's another reason is that in Japan, it's very easy to go IPO. So for a lot of corporates, it doesn't make sense to become a unicorn before making the IPO. It's much easier to become small rich by making the IPO, becoming an angel investor, and then creating other small rich startups. That's the truth of the Japanese ecosystem here. By the way, if you are a startup in Canada and you would like to do an IPO in Japan, there's a very interesting structure provided by the government who allows foreign companies to go IPO in Japan. So if you're interested, please let me know. An initiative from the government, as I say, the J Startup, they're creating new kind of visa. So if you want to make business here in Japan, it's becoming more and more easy. Hundreds and hundreds of different accelerators. Sorry, that's in Japanese, but there are accelerators, especially for the food industry too, like provided like Ajinomoto, Sapporo, Kirin. Those are huge, very famous food industry companies in Japan providing accelerator programs, which is open for foreign startups too most of the time. But that could be an interesting key point. Okay, so to finish my presentation, give you a few tips. The communication will be a big issue, not because only for the language, but the mindset, the culture is so different that the communication will take a lot of time to make sure that you are understanding correctly each other. Most of large corporates, they don't know exactly what they want. They have vague idea on the direction they want to go, but they don't know the details of the right technology to use. Super slow. Sometimes it takes months to sign an NDA. And that's really a big issue here. You will have to repeat the same explanation again and again and again, because they will do this tarai-mawashi and make you meet a lot of people in the same company. For some reason, they want to have the explanation again. So be prepared for that. The relationship might be even important than the actual product itself. So make sure that when you try to start business with a Japanese corporation, you have to build a trust nest, make a personal relationship with the person in front of you. That's changing because you are not physically meeting anyone anymore, but documents must be printed out. So if you have a physical meeting with Japanese corporate, make sure to print out your documents and make sure how many people will come to the meeting to prepare the number of documents, one per person for each person. Have a Japanese person in the team could be very helpful. On the other side, if you have a Japanese person, you have to behave like a Japanese person. It means that you have to know all those small details, like there are a lot of many different rules, like how you have to live.
In the meantime, if you had any questions for Alex, please feel free to start asking them into the chat function. I see that he's trying to reconnect at this stage, but if you have any questions for him, please feel free to, in the chat function, to message all panelists, and we'll try to get a response to that. So hopefully we're able to connect him. He was at the end of his presentation there, and we'll be able to continue. Sorry for the inconvenience. While we're waiting for Alex, we had a question. Maybe we'll go to that for Meros. If Meros could just go on the screen just for a second. And sorry to jump around like this, but we did have an additional question that was asked to Meros at the last minute. So we will go to that question. So the question to Meros was, let me just grab that there. Do the Japanese concerns about the effects of bioengineered food in animal and human feed, such as residues in foods, such as pesticides, drugs, are they a concern to Japanese consumers?
Good, yeah, good question. So I'll let Chisa talk about anything GMO related. That's sort of her, a little bit more of her area. But, you know, when you think about, is it a concern to the Japanese consumer? You need to separate it into a government concern and an actual end consumer concern. So things like residues in foods, like such as pesticides, it's incredibly strict on the import side, right? The Japanese government, that's one reason we always say be very careful to look at the regulations for import, because some things that are allowed in Canada will not be allowed in Japan. So that sort of that gatekeeping function is extremely, extremely strict in Japan. But as a result, once it gets to the market, there isn't necessarily the same sort of like worry among Japanese consumers that the food that they're buying in the supermarket is unsafe, or that they really have to, you know, double check. There's a lot more sort of maybe trust that if it's on the supermarket shelves, it should be okay. That said, there is a big movement for like additive free, like you can see on the packaging, additive free marketing is definitely something. So people do definitely respond to the idea of sort of natural or less additives as far as a consumer level. But as far as GMO things in human and animal feed, like for example, US soybeans, GMO soybeans are not allowed in food for Japan. How much of that is consumer demand and how much of that is basically a non-trade barrier from Japan to keep certain products out, competitive products, that can be debated. But maybe Chisa has some comments on the GMO issue.
Yeah, the GMO has still some consumers concerned about it, and some products like natto, the fermented soybean products, or tofu, those kind of the semi or the processed products of soybean products, we all see the non-GM labels on that. But the miso, okay. Alex, are you there?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I had some network issue. I'm now back.
Okay, maybe you please continue. Or
thank you very much for keeping the time. So not sure where exactly I finished my presentation. I think I was talking about the different tips on dealing with Japanese.
The rules. There were many, many rules that people need to follow if you're actually Japanese. That's where you live.
Yeah. So maybe I could. I'm not sure if there's any questions, but considering the time I have left, maybe better to spend the next few minutes to answer questions, or I don't know if you have comments or whatever from the audience.
Great. Okay, yeah, thanks, Alex. I think you were on the last slide. We have, we would open the floor again to any questions that you have for Alex. So we have received a few questions already. One of the questions referred to the Tadaima Washi that you referred to before. Is that a good sign in your opinion when you're getting that having that situation, or if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, that would be great.
Well, it's not a much of a good sign, unfortunately. If they, so the thing is, they try to be polite with you, especially if you're introduced by someone who already have a partnership or a relationship with the company. So if you're introduced, you present your products, and they will say, yeah, well, that's not exactly a good fit with my division. So let me introduce you another person. It's more like, yeah, I'm not interested, but I don't want to tell that. So being this Taramashi is not very good sign, I think.
Thank you. Another question we had was, you mentioned that doing business with Japanese companies is very much relationship based, in which it would be easier to prospect business opportunities in person. But because of the COVID situation, what are some tips to establish a relationship with Japanese companies digitally?
All right, so that's something I would like to know, because really before the COVID, it was more like you go to big events, you meet people, you are introduced to someone by another person you do business before, and this is how you were physically expanding the network. And be connected to someone on LinkedIn, it wasn't much opening new opportunities in Japan. So you really have to meet them personally and build a relationship from there. So the culture, the mindset, it's changing very slowly but surely. And but one thing I can tell is that introduction is going to be the key. Because how to say? So as I say, relationship is super important. So if you have a relationship with someone, right? And if this someone you already trust make an introduction, the trust you already have with the person will be added to the credit of the introduced person. So if you want to meet a company or have a discussion with a corporate, maybe a good thing is not to knock their door directly, is trying to find someone who can make an introduction. And that's maybe one tips that could be used during this COVID situation. Or maybe the Meros team also had an idea about that.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, Alex. It's really about introductions. And we're finding in the last 6 months that some of those introductions are coming from the embassies. More and more embassies are trying to do, virtual missions and business matching. So really take advantage of opportunities that the Canadian Embassy may bring. Chamber of Commerce, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, other organizations that can help you to get that introductory meeting. But once you can get that, we're finding that people are really, they're making a good faith effort to use Zoom and to use the technologies and to, try to have meetings and reproduce that meeting, in a virtual way. It is not, as Alex said, it's not the same as having a drink after a meeting, but Japan is surprisingly low tech in a lot of ways. Most people just use their cell phone for all communication. They don't even have a laptop at home, a lot of them. So it's been a kind of a learning curve, I think, for a lot of corporates to figure out how to use Zoom even to have meetings. But they're doing the same thing. They're also trying to make relationships now on Zoom. So I think we're all kind of learning together. And if you have that intro meeting, introduction, you can definitely do it.
I think thank you. I think being introduced
Alex,
by embassies could be very helpful.
Alex, I just need to jump in for a second, just to follow up on that point. So obviously part of our job at the Embassy of Canada is to make introductions, and we're very happy to do that. And of course we work with partners to help us make introductions as well. What we've seen over the last 6 months has been really interesting in terms of how Japanese companies are making the effort to pivot. We've also seen in some areas that because there's no longer a huge time or money commitment required to travel, we're seeing for some activities that we're doing with these virtual B2Bs, huge numbers of companies that are interested and who are wanting to participate in our events, much more than we would have had if we were doing a live event. Obviously, relationships, as has been mentioned, are super important. But the reality is that Japan is not allowing Canadians into this country anytime soon. They're starting to negotiate with some of the Asian neighbors for business travelers, but currently there is no ability to get into Japan from Canada if you're a business traveler, which is not the same for Canada. We do have a national interest exemption, and we are facilitating certain Japanese business people to go to Canada, particularly in the agriculture sector. So those, virtual ideas, I think we're going to have to continue to use for at least the near future.
Thank you. Well, and I think because I'm dealing with about 25 embassies in Tokyo here, and I can see that when introductions are made by the embassies, it helps a lot. It's almost like a proof that the company is a serious company. So, and I'm sure that Canada is one of the best countries when it comes to support provided to make introduction in Japanese market. So I think the audience who can have this opportunity to go through the embassy to get in touch with potential partners. I'm not sure how it works exactly, but it will be a big help, I think, to establish a communication in Japan.
Great, thank you for that. So we had a few other questions. One question, it's an interesting one, and I'm curious about your answer about is, do you have any suggestions on socializing tricks for someone who doesn't drink alcohol at all? As you mentioned before, the drinking culture in Japan is quite prevalent. And so this is a really interesting question about, is there any way that, we can still have that social connection without necessarily that part of the culture? So,
okay. So actually, there is a word in Japanese named nominication. Nomu means drink, combined with communication. So nominication, it means that when you're drunk, you can speak frankly and become a friend easier. So that's why drinking alcohol is very important. It's more like having fun together. Because when you're at the business, you have to be super serious. You have to be extremely polite. You have to be careful about what you say. And this is why when you're drunk, you are kind of excused to say things that you would never tell at the meeting. So this is why drinking is important. But it means that if you can't drink alcohol and you are not Japanese, it's easier. If you're Japanese, you don't drink alcohol, well, elderly people will say, hey, come on. But if you're not Japanese and say, oh, I don't drink, it's, oh, okay, that's how it is. But the important point is to be very open, very polite. Try to remember some words in Japanese. Like even if you don't have a beer or alcohol in your glass, say kanpai, or this is when you say cheers, or say konnichiwa or arigatou gozaimashita. Any of those Japanese words, try to show that you are respecting the Japanese culture, and that will help have a closer distance with the person you're having from. And keep in mind that you are trying to have a personal relationship. So great businessman will remember the name of the husband or the wife of the person and try to mention it in the conversation, or there's the birthday of the child, they will try to bring small gifts, So it's really like showing that you are interested to the person and not just the business. And this is easier to do when you're drunk in the Japanese culture. This is why drinking is important. But if you can do this without having alcohol in your blood, then that's fine, right? So it's still like the socializing is to show that you are interested to the person, I think. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. and the next question we have is, are there, given your experience, what are some examples of North American companies that you've helped to succeed in this market, and maybe some tips on what they did well to do well, in your opinion?
Okay, there is a company I've helped come to the Japanese market doing neuromarketing. It's a company who had the technology to scan the brain activity of a person and see how the person is concentrated or not watching movie content. And this technology is used to make movie trailers or TV commercials. And we helped this company to come to the Japanese market. And what we figured out is that the concept of KPI was not much important in that industry in Japan. It's more like the TV commercial director would say, okay, this is how we should do it. And there were not any scientific background check in that field. So what we tried to do is to give a lot of examples of what was done in the US. And Japanese people is very unique. Like when it comes from outside of Japan, they tend to believe it easier than when it comes from Japan. I don't know why. It's maybe how the Edo period ended when the Americans came with the big black boat. There is a black boat, by the way, it's a word which exists in Japanese, kurofune. It's something which comes outside from Japan that will completely change the society. So if you have black boat, if it's something which comes out of the Japan, they tend to believe it easier. So if you make a lot of use cases, like showing that it's been used outside of Japan by very famous brands, like in the case of the TV commercial, brain check technology was, okay, Budweiser is using, Paramount is using, or Unilever is using, putting all those big names were very important. So I think that is one of the tips. Make sure that you have a lot of use cases with preferably famous names on it, if not government or public institutions, like the local government of Montreal, or it could be whatever, but something that people would say, oh, okay, that's a serious, that's something we can trust. That could be a tip. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, just looking at the time now, we're running late into your evening, and we appreciate your attention. And I think I learned a lot from Alex's presentation as well as Meros, and I hope you all found it to be informative as well. So as mentioned before, please feel free to follow up directly with the speakers or the embassy should you have any further questions. As mentioned before, we will send out the contact information along with the presentations received today. I should also note that this is a step in terms of a series of events we're doing for the Investment Champion program here in Tokyo. In late January, Protein Industries Canada, as Justin mentioned earlier, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, provincial colleagues, the embassy, consulate, and trade offices in Japan will all be organizing a plant protein virtual mission in which interested and selected Canadian companies will have the opportunity to give an investment trade pitch to Japanese companies and have meetings online. So to help with the Japanese recruitment of this process, on October 6th, Mr. Bill Gruhl, CEO of Protein Industries Canada, will be giving a presentation to Japanese companies on the state of the Canadian plant protein industry. So in terms of the January event, we look forward to providing you with further information about that in the near future. Until then, please stay tuned for more details if this sounds like it might be of interest to you. And so again, to conclude, I just wanted to thank very much Meros, Edgeoff, Pick, and to all our guests this evening for participating in this webinar. So thank you very much, and have a great evening.